a fake name. Something answered. The police report calls it a justifiable use of psychological diversion in a high-stress scenario. The detective who took my statement patted me on the shoulder, told me I had good instincts, and said that screaming a fake name to trick a mugger into thinking I wasn't alone was a stroke of genius. He said I was lucky. He said street smarts saved my life. But the detective didn't hear the audio from my dashcam. He didn't hear the low, guttural static that answered me when I screamed that name. I haven't told anyone about the recording. I haven't told anyone that when I yelled for help, the empty seat beside me whispered back. It was a Saturday night in late January, the kind of Chicago winter night where the wind doesn't just blow, it hunts. The air was sharp enough to crack your lips the second you stepped outside a dry, bitter freeze that turned the city into a gray skeleton of itself. I was sitting in my 2016 Honda Civic, idling in the back corner of a McDonald's parking lot, watching the steam from my exhaust pipe curl up and die in the red glow of the drive-through sign. My car was my sanctuary, my office, and lately the only thing standing between me and eviction. It smelled permanently of stale French fries and anxiety. I tapped the steering wheel, staring at the UberEats app on my phone mounted to the dashboard. The screen was too bright in the dark cabin, a harsh white rectangle illuminating the bags under my eyes. Searching for orders, it pulsed, a hypnotic mocking rhythm. It had been 3 months since the tech layoff. One email, a generic severance package that barely covered a month of rent, and I was out. I went from coding back-end logic for a logistics startup to delivering Big Macs to stoned college students at 2:00 a.m. I wasn't bitter, at least that's what I told myself, but poverty has a specific taste. It tastes like cold grease and the metallic tang of panic at the back of your throat. Tonight was wrong, though. Usually Saturday nights in the city are a chaotic symphony of drunk orders, surge pricing, and constant movement. But tonight the map was dead. No heat zones, no pings. Just the hum of my heater fan rattling against a loose vent. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed against the windows like water, deep underwater. It felt like the city was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I looked down at my key fob lying in the cup holder. It was an aftermarket modification I'd installed back when I had a salary and disposable income, a high-end remote start system with a proximity sensor. It was a stupid luxury for a Civic, but I loved it. I loved the way I could bring the machine to life from 50 feet away, how the engine would growl awake and the heater would blast before I even touched the door handle. Now it was just a fidget toy. I ran my thumb over the smooth black plastic, tracing the red panic button and the circular arrow of the remote start. Click, 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 a nervous tick. Then the phone screamed. The notification sound cut through the silence so sharply I actually jumped my knee, hitting the steering column. I scrambled to look at the offer. $18.50, McDonald's, 4.2 miles. $18.50 for a fast food run. That was unheard of. That was triple the normal rate. My thumb hovered over the accept button, fueled by the desperate math running through my head. $18 meant half a tank of gas. It meant groceries for 2 days. But then I looked at the destination map. The drop-off pin wasn't in the loop. It wasn't in the suburbs. It was deep in the Ironworks District, an industrial graveyard on the south side that local drivers called the Dead Zone. It was a grid of abandoned factories, boarded-up row houses and flickering streetlights that the city had stopped bothering to repair years ago. You didn't go there at night. You didn't go there unless you were looking for trouble or looking to disappear. "Don't do it, Caleb," I whispered to the empty car. "It's bait." But the timer on the screen was ticking down, a circular bar shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. The algorithm knew I was desperate. It knew exactly how much my dignity cost, $18.50. I tapped accept. The app chirped cheerfully, oblivious to the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I pulled around to the pickup window, grabbing the sealed brown paper bag that reeked of salt and artificial meat. The worker at the window didn't even look at me. She just shoved the bag out her face, pale and exhausted, before slamming the sliding glass shut as if she were sealing an airlock. I tossed the bag onto the passenger seat. "Buckle up," I muttered. A bad habit. I talked to the car. I talked to the food. When you spend 10 hours a day alone in a metal box, you start treating inanimate objects like coworkers just to hear a voice. The passenger seat was empty, a dark void of upholstery that seemed to absorb the streetlights as I pulled out of the lot. I followed the GPS. The blue line on my phone pointed south away from the safety of the skyline toward the ink-black horizon of the industrial sector. As I crossed the bridge over the canal, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't subtle. It was like driving through a curtain of ice. The amber glow of the city lights faded behind me, replaced by the jagged shadows of rusted warehouses. The roads here were pockmarked with potholes that looked like craters, forcing me to swerve and slow down, breaking the hypnotic rhythm of the drive. My phone screen flickered, just once. A quick blackout, then it returned. I frowned, tapping the mount. "Come on, not now!" A mile later, it happened again. This time the map spun wildly, the arrow indicating my car doing a 360-degree pirouette before snapping back to the road. The ETA jumped from 8 minutes to 4 hours, then back to 8 minutes. "Glitchy piece of junk," I hissed, blaming the latest software update. I was a developer. I knew how spaghetti code worked. I knew that GPS signals could bounce off metal structures and cause interference. It was logic. It was explainable. It wasn't a warning. But then the radio cut out. I had been listening to a podcast about finance, a dry voice droning on about interest rates. Abruptly, the voice was severed, replaced by a wall of white noise. It wasn't the soft fuzz of a lost signal. It was a violent, abrasive static that sounded like someone tearing thick canvas. I reached for the volume knob to turn it down, but the static surged louder, vibrating the plastic door panels. Krish, ka, krish. My hand froze. For a split second, buried in the chaos of the frequency, I thought I heard a syllable. A human sound. Not a word, just a breathy, truncated intake of air like someone about to speak right next to my ear. I slammed the power button. The radio died instantly. Silence rushed back and ringing in my ears. I exhaled, my breath fogging the windshield. Okay. Bad reception, old wiring. Relax, Caleb. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I was rationalizing, building a fortress of logic to keep out the primal fear scratching at the back of my lizard brain. The car was 8 years old. The wiring harness was probably corroded. We were near high-tension power lines. The electromagnetic fields in industrial zones were notorious for messing with electronics. There was a cause, and there was an effect. That's how the world worked. But the silence in the car felt different now. It felt attentive. I glanced at the passenger seat. The bag of McDonald's sat there, grease already staining the bottom corner. Nothing else, just shadows. I forced my eyes back to the road, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. The GPS led me off the main road and onto a street that barely qualified as paved. Weeds shot up through cracks in the asphalt like grasping fingers. To my left was a long wrought iron fence that seemed to stretch for miles. I squinted through the darkness and realized it was the perimeter of the old St. Jude's Cemetery. Great, of course. A spooky delivery past a graveyard. The universe really was leaning into the cliches tonight. The GPS voice, usually a robotic female alto, crackled through the phone speakers. "Turn right in 0 feet." I turned. The headlights swept across a row of houses that looked like they had been chewed up and spat out by the decade. Most were boarded up, spray-painted with gang tags that had faded into illegible hieroglyphs. Some had collapsed roofs, their skeletal beams jutting into the sky. But the house at the end of the block was different. It stood alone, separated from the rot of its neighbors by overgrown lots filled with rusted junk. It was a 2-story Victorian, the paint peeled away to reveal gray, weather-beaten wood that looked like dead skin. There were no streetlights here. The only illumination came from my headlights cutting 2 cones of white through the oppressive darkness. I slowed the car to a crawl. The gravel crunched loudly under my tires, a sound that felt aggressively loud in the stillness. "You have arrived," the GPS announced. Then it added something it had never said before. "Good luck." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the phone. Had it actually said that, or had my brain fried by stress and fatigue filled in the silence? I waited for it to repeat, to say, "Good luck with your route," or something standard, but the phone just sat there, the blue dot pulsing on the location of the dead house. "Pareidolia," I whispered. "Audio pareidolia. The brain finding patterns in noise. You're tired, Caleb. You're stressed. Stop scaring yourself." I checked the delivery instructions. "Leave at door. Do not ring bell. Tip in cash under mat. Tip in cash." That was the hook. That was the reason I was going to get out of this car. Cash was untraceable, immediate, and desperately needed. I shifted the car into park but left the engine running. I looked at the house. It was completely dark. Not a single candle, not a standby light from a TV, nothing. It looked like a black hole cut out of the fabric of the night. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made the hair on my arms stand up. The front door was cracked open, just a sliver, maybe 2 inches, a vertical line of absolute darkness against the gray wood. Who leaves their front door open in weather like this? In a neighborhood like this? Wind, I told myself. The latch is broken. It's an old house. The wind blew it open. I looked at the trees surrounding the lot. The dead winter branches were perfectly still. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. I couldn't just sit here. The longer I sat, the more the fear would calcify, locking me in place. I needed to move. I needed to be a machine. Execute the task. Get the money. Leave. I reached for the ignition. Standard protocol for delivery drivers in bad areas. Keep the car running for a quick getaway. But standard protocol also said, don't get your car stolen. I looked at the dark street. If someone was hiding in those bushes and I left the car running unlocked, I'd be stranded here. I made a compromise. I turned the engine off. The silence that fell was immediate and suffocating. The cold began to seep in instantly through the thin metal doors. I pulled the key out of the ignition and shoved it deep into the right pocket of my jeans, my fingers curling around the fob. "Okay," I muttered. "In and out. 30 seconds. I grabbed the grease-stained bag from the passenger seat. As I lifted it, the smell of the food wafted up salty, meaty normal. It was a grounding scent, a reminder of the banal reality of my job. I was just a guy delivering burgers. This wasn't a horror movie. This was a transaction. I opened the driver's side door. The hinge groaned a rusty screech that echoed down the empty street. I winced, stepping out onto the cracked pavement. The air hit me like a physical blow, stripping the warmth from my jacket instantly. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The car chirped a cheerful electronic sound that felt ridiculously out of place. I squeezed the fob in my pocket one last time, feeling the raised bumps of the buttons. My lifeline. I walked toward the house. The path to the porch was overgrown dead weeds brushing against my jeans with a dry scratching sound. The house loomed over me, feeling impossibly tall. The architecture was all wrong angles that seemed too sharp, windows that looked like eyes narrowed in suspicion. I reached the porch stairs. They were wooden, rotting at the edges. I tested the first step with my weight. It held but gave a soft, wet groan. I climbed. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. I stood on the porch. The air here smelled different. It didn't smell like winter or the city. It smelled like copper, like old pennies held in a sweaty palm, and beneath that a faint chemical sharp scent like bleach masking something rotten. I stood in front of the door. The gap was still there, 2 inches of darkness. I could just leave the food on the porch. That was the instruction. Leave at door. I didn't need to interact. I bent down to place the bag on the mat. Creak. The sound didn't come from beneath my feet. It came from inside. I froze halfway, crouched the bag, hovering inches above the floorboards. The door moved. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind. The door swung inward slowly, smoothly, as if the hinges had been freshly oiled just for this moment. It opened wide, revealing a hallway swallowed by shadows. I straightened up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My fight-or-flight response was screaming at me to run, to vault over the porch railing and sprint to the Civic. But curiosity, that fatal flaw, kept my feet planted. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded thin, pathetic in the heavy air. "UberEats." Nothing. Then a sound. A soft, wet, shifting noise, like meat sliding across tile. A figure emerged from the darkness of the hallway. He didn't walk. He seemed to manifest from the shadows themselves. One moment the hallway was empty, the next he was standing on the threshold. He was tall, towering over 6 feet, wearing a dirty white tank top that exposed arms covered in ink. But they weren't normal tattoos. I had seen gang tats, I had seen prison ink, I had seen hipster sleeves. This was different. The ink was dense black and geometric lines and circles that intersected in ways that hurt the eyes to look at. They crawled up his neck, over his jawline, and disappeared into his hairline. But it was his face that made my blood run cold. His skin was pale, pasty, like dough left out too long. And his eyes... He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing me. His pupils were blown wide black eclipses that swallowed the irises. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach those dead, abyssal eyes. It was a rictus of muscle, a mechanical imitation of a human expression. He stood there, blocking the entrance, blocking the light, blocking the air. I have your order," I stammered, holding out the bag. My arm shook uncontrollably. "Just gonna leave it here." The man didn't look at the bag. He took a step forward. He stepped out onto the porch, invading my personal space. The smell of copper and bleach intensified, choking me. He tilted his head to the side, a jerky bird-like motion. "You brought it," he said. His voice was like grinding stones, low, rough, and vibrating with a strange resonance. "Yeah, the food," I said, taking a step back. "It's all there." "Not the food," he whispered. He took another step. I took another step back, my heel hitting the edge of the top stair. I was trapped. "The vessel," he said. "You brought the vessel." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to be back in my car, back in the safety of the stale French fry smell, back in the world of logic and interest rates and poverty. "I'm just gonna go," I said, my voice cracking. "Enjoy the burger." I turned to leave. "Wait." The word was a command, not a request. It hooked into my spine and yanked me to a stop. "You didn't get your tip," he said. He reached his hand into the pocket of his baggy cargo pants. "Logic tried one last time to save me. He's getting the cash. He said the tip was cash. Just wait for the cash. You need the $8. Don't be rude. Don't escalate." I watched his hand. The tattoos on his forearm seemed to writhe as the muscles flexed. He pulled his hand out. It wasn't a wallet. It wasn't a wad of crumpled bills. It was a knife, a hunting knife with a serrated spine and a curved belly, the steel dull and gray in the moonlight. He didn't lunge. He didn't slash. He just held it up, admiring the edge, then pointed it directly at my chest. "The silence is hungry, Caleb," he said. He knew my name. Of course the app. The app gave him my name. But the way he said it like he was tasting it. And tonight, he smiled wider, the skin around his mouth stretching too tight. "We are going to feed it." The terror that washed over me wasn't hot. It was ice cold. It clarified the world. I saw the grain of the wood on the porch. I saw the rust on the railing. I saw the absolute emptiness of the street behind me. I was alone. I was miles from help. I was facing a man who didn't want my wallet. He wanted my existence. My hand was already in my pocket. My fingers were already wrapped around the key fob. I looked at the knife. I looked at his dead eyes. And I realized that logic had led me into a trap, but madness might be the only way out. I couldn't fight him. I couldn't outrun a knife at this distance. I needed a ghost. I gripped the key fob until the plastic edges dug into my skin. I took a breath, inhaling the copper scent of the death he promised. and I prepared to lie like my soul depended on it, because tonight it did. The serrated edge of the hunting knife caught the moonlight, transforming the dull gray steel into a jagged line of silver that pointed directly at my throat. Time didn't just slow down, it curdled. It became a thick, gelatinous substance that I had to wade through moment by agonizing moment. The biology of terror is a fascinating thing when you aren't the one experiencing it. When you are, it's just a systemic failure. My knees locked, my stomach dropped into a bottomless pit, and the saliva in my mouth evaporated instantly, leaving my tongue feeling like a piece of dry sandpaper glued to the roof of my mouth. The man, the ink man, didn't lunge. That was the worst part. A mugger lunges because they want the transaction to be over. A junkie attacks because they are desperate for the fix. But a predator savors the realization dawning in the prey's eyes. He stood perfectly still on the rotting porch the knife held, with the casual familiarity of a man who used it to eat his dinner. The smell coming off him, that cloying mix of bleach and old copper, seemed to expand, filling the space between us until I was breathing his atmosphere, inhaling the toxins of his madness. "The vessel needs to be empty," he murmured, his voice vibrating with that strange, grinding resonance. "But fear scrubs the soul clean. Fear pushes out the noise." My fingers were still wrapped around the key fob in my pocket. Clutching it so tightly I felt the plastic seam biting into my thumb. It was my only anchor to reality, the only technological tether I had left in a world that had suddenly reverted to something ancient and primal. "I don't have any money," I managed to choke out. My voice was unrecognizable, an octave too high, trembling like a child's. "The app handles everything. It's digital. I'm empty." The ink man took a half step closer. The floorboards groaned in protest, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the dead zone. He tilted his head, the geometric tattoos on his neck stretching and distorting like snakes writhing under his skin. "Digital," he repeated, tasting the word and finding it sour. "Noise, distraction. You think you are empty, Caleb, but you are full of static. Full of worries about rent, about status, about the girl who left, about the job you lost. I can hear it buzzing in your blood." How did he know cold sweat erupted across my back? He couldn't know about the layoff. He couldn't know about the breakup unless he had been watching, unless this wasn't random. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't a random delivery driver. I was selected. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I am the opener," he said, and the smile that split his face was a violation of anatomy. It stretched too wide, exposing gums that were gray and receding. "And you are the package." He raised the knife an inch higher. The tip was now level with my sternum. My mind raced, spinning through options and discarding them in microseconds. Run. He was closer to the stairs than I was. Fight. He had a knife and 50 pounds of muscle on me. I had a lanyard and carpal tunnel syndrome. Scream. The nearest house was a boarded-up shell, and the wind would carry my voice into the graveyard across the street, where the only listeners were 6 feet under. Logic had failed. Reason was a corpse on the floor. I needed to break the script. The plan formed in the panic-stricken soup of my brain. It was stupid. It was suicidal. It relied on a piece of technology that glitched half the time and a bluff that had zero foundation in reality. But looking at the abyss in his eyes, I knew that doing nothing meant dying on this porch, bleeding out into the rotting wood while he whispered crazy prayers over my body. I tightened my grip on the fob. My thumb found the circular button. Remote start. I needed a name. Not just any name. A name that sounded heavy. A name that sounded like violence. I took a breath. I let the fear turn into fuel. "I'm not alone," I said. The ink man stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly, the black pools contracting. "Lies foul the vessel." "I said I'm not alone," I repeated louder this time, letting the tremor in my voice harden into hysterical desperation. I took a step back, angling my body toward the street, toward the dark, silent shape of my Honda Civic sitting 30 feet away in the shadows. "There is no one," the ink man hissed, his patience fraying. "The street is dead. The house is dead. You are alone. Derek." The name ripped out of my throat a raw, jagged scream that shredded my vocal cords. It was loud enough to wake the dead in the cemetery across the road. "Derek, get the gun! He's got a knife! Shoot him now!" The effect was instantaneous. The ink man didn't attack. He flinched. It was a primal, instinctive reaction to the threat of a firearm. The human brain, no matter how steeped in madness, understands the hierarchy of weapons. Gun beats knife. In that split second of hesitation, I pressed the button in my pocket. Once, twice, hold. Vroom! The reaction from the car was violent. Because the engine was cold and the exhaust was old, the Honda didn't just purr to life, it roared. The revs spiked high on the startup, a mechanical growl that sounded far more aggressive than a 1.5-liter engine had any right to be. At the same instant, the headlights cut through the darkness. The high beams were on. Two blinding cones of halogen light exploded into existence, slicing through the gloom and illuminating the porch with the sudden, shocking brightness of an interrogation room. The light hit the ink man square in the face. He threw his arm up to shield his eyes, the knife dipping for a fraction of a second. This was it. This was my window. I should have run. I should have vaulted the railing and sprinted for the driver's side door while he was blinded. But I didn't move. I couldn't move, because I was watching his face. The ink man wasn't looking at me anymore. He wasn't looking at the gun that I claimed was there. He was looking past me over my left shoulder, directly at the windshield of my car. And he was screaming. It wasn't a scream of anger. It wasn't the roar of a predator denied a kill. It was the high, thin shriek of a child waking up from a nightmare to find the monster sitting on their chest. The color drained from his already pale face, leaving him looking like bleached bone. He scrambled back his boots, slipping on the wet wood of the porch, flailing his arms as if trying to ward off a swarm of bees. "Not empty," he howled, his voice cracking. "It's not empty, you lied, you brought it." He pressed his back against the doorframe, his chest heaving, the knife trembling violently in his hand. He wasn't pointing the blade at me anymore. He was pointing it at the car, specifically at the passenger seat. I turned my head. The windshield was a glare of reflected light, opaque from this angle. I couldn't see inside. I knew the car was empty. I knew the passenger seat held nothing but a grease-stained McDonald's bag and the phantom weight of my loneliness. But looking at the terror in the ink man's eyes, a terror so absolute it eclipsed his madness, doubt began to crawl up my spine like a freezing spider. He saw something. He didn't just think someone was there. He was seeing something that violated his understanding of the world. "Get it away," he shrieked, slashing the knife through the air at the invisible threat. "The vessel is full, too full, it's leaking, take it away." He slammed the door. He didn't just close it. He threw his entire body weight against it, slamming it shut with a force that shook the frame. Then I heard the deadbolt slide home. Then the chain. Then the sound of something heavy being dragged in front of the door. I was left standing alone on the porch, bathed in the harsh white glow of my headlights, the engine of my car idling with a steady rhythmic thrum. Thump, 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 thump. My heart matched the engine's beat. Adrenaline is a powerful drug, but when the immediate threat vanishes, it leaves a vacuum. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the heavy, expectant silence of the dead zone. It was the confused, ringing silence of survival. I looked at the closed door. I looked at the bag of food still sitting on the mat where I had dropped it. "Run," my brain whispered. The command finally reconnected with my legs. I scrambled backward down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. I hit the gravel driveway and sprinted toward the car. As I approached the driver's side, I hesitated. The engine was running. The heat was blasting. The car was exactly as I had left it. But the ink man's words echoed in my ears, bouncing around my skull like a pinball. "It's not empty. You brought it." I reached for the handle. The metal was freezing cold, biting into my palm. I yanked the door open and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and hitting the lock button so hard I almost broke the plastic switch. Clunk, clunk, locked, safe. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if I had run a marathon. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes for a second to steady the spinning world. "Okay," I panted. "Okay, crazy junkie, just a crazy junkie, hallucinations, shadow people. You scared him, you won." I opened my eyes. The interior of the car was bathed in the soft amber glow of the dashboard lights. The heater was roaring, pumping hot air into the cabin. Too hot. I frowned. I kept my climate control set to 72 degrees. Comfortable. But the air hitting my face felt like the breath of an oven. It was stifling, thick and dry. I looked at the display. High. The temperature was set to maximum heat. I stared at the knob. Had I bumped it? Maybe when I got out I didn't remember touching it. I reached out and dialed it down the plastic cool under my fingertips. "Just nerves," I muttered. "You're shaking. You're messing things up." I gripped the gear shift to put the car in reverse, desperate to get away from this accursed house. But as my hand touched the leather of the shifter, I froze again. The seatbelt sensor chimed. Ding. I looked at the dashboard. My seatbelt was on. The red icon for the driver was unlit. Ding. It chimed again. I looked at the passenger side icon. It was flashing red. Passenger detected, fasten seatbelt. My blood turned to slush. I turned my head slowly, agonizingly toward the passenger seat. There was nothing there. Just the empty curve of the upholstery, the dark fabric worn smooth by years of use. No bag I had left the food on the porch. Just empty space. But the seat looked depressed. The center of the cushion was pressed down slightly, the fabric taut, as if under the weight of a person. Ding. "It's the sensor," I said aloud, my voice shaking so badly the words were barely intelligible. "It's broken. Wiring. The cold." I reached out with a trembling hand and slapped the passenger seat cushion. See nothing. Nobody. The fabric felt warm. Not ambient warm from the heater. Body heat warm. The kind of warmth that transfers from a living thing to a surface. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. Ding, ding, ding. The chiming was getting faster, more urgent. "Shut up!" I yelled at the dashboard. "Shut up!" I threw the car into reverse and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the loose gravel, spraying stones against the undercarriage like bullets. The car fish-tailed violently, swinging the nose around until I was facing the road. I slammed it into drive and peeled out, leaving the house, the porch, and the Inkman behind in a cloud of dust and exhaust. I drove like a madman. I blew through the stop sign at the end of the block. I swerved around potholes that would have snapped an axle. I didn't care. I just needed to get back to the light, back to the grid, back to the world where things made sense. But the dead zone didn't want to let me go. The fog had rolled in while I was on the porch. It wasn't normal fog. It was a thick, yellowish soup that clung to the ground and swirled around the car. It reflected my high beams back at me, creating a wall of white blindness. I had to slow down, fighting the urge to keep the pedal floored, and the car felt heavy. I know how my Civic drives. It's light responsive. But now the steering felt sluggish, the acceleration dragged. It felt like I was carrying an extra 300 pounds of cargo. The suspension groaned over bumps that usually wouldn't register. Ding, ding. The seatbelt chime had stopped for a moment, but now it was back intermittent like a signal losing connection. I glanced at the passenger seat again. The depression in the cushion was gone. But now there was a smell. At first I thought it was the lingering scent of the McDonald's bag I had carried earlier. But as I inhaled, I realized it was different. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Old Spice cologne, cigarette smoke, and rain. The smell of wet wool. It was a specific combination, a nostalgic combination. "No," I whispered. "Stop it." I fumbled for the radio. I needed noise. I needed the finance podcast. I needed music. Anything to drown out the chiming and the terrifying familiarity of that smell. I hit the power button. Static blasted through the speakers again, louder than before. Kirsch! Damn it! I hit the scan button. The numbers on the digital display cycled rapidly. 98.5, 101.1, 103.5. The tuner didn't stop on any station. It just kept cycling round and round, finding nothing but static. Then the static changed texture. It wasn't random noise anymore. It had a rhythm, a cadence. It rose and fell like breathing. I kept my eyes on the road, watching the yellow fog swirl past the windshield. I was gripping the wheel so hard my hands were numb. Is someone there? The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was the stupidest thing I could have done. You don't acknowledge the phenomenon. You ignore it until it goes away. That's the rule. The radio static spiked. A sharp, high-pitched squeal of feedback tore through the cabin, making me wince. Then silence. The radio didn't turn off, but the static cut out completely. In the sudden quiet, I heard a sound that made my heart stop beating for a full second. Click. It was the sound of the passenger side seatbelt buckle latching. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the wet asphalt, sliding sideways before coming to a halt in the middle of the empty road. The silence was absolute. I turned my head. The passenger seatbelt was buckled. The strap was pulled taut across the empty seat, stretching over an invisible chest, disappearing into the dark void where a lap should be. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process the visual data. Seatbelts don't buckle themselves. Inertia reels lock up, yes. Mechanisms jam, yes. But the metal tongue doesn't lift itself up, pull across the seat, and insert itself into the receiver until it clicks. That requires intent. That requires hands. The smell of Old Spice and wet wool was overpowering now. It filled the cabin, choking out the smell of fear. Derek, I whispered. The name felt like a jagged piece of glass in my mouth. The dashboard lights flickered. The heater fans surged, blowing a gust of hot air into my face. And then the radio came back on. But it wasn't static this time. And it wasn't the podcast. It was a recording, a looping, garbled audio clip that sounded like it was being played from deep underwater. Watch the road. The voice was deep, gravelly, familiar. Eyes on the road, kid. I gasped, pressing my back against the driver's door, trying to get as far away from the passenger seat as possible. I knew that voice. It was the voice of the man I bought the car from 2 years ago. The old man who had listed it on Craigslist for way below market value. He had been sad tired. He told me the car belonged to his son who had died, his son Derek. I didn't know, I stammered, addressing the empty seat. I just needed a name. I didn't know. The seatbelt strap tightened. I watched the fabric of the belt strain, digging into the invisible form it was restraining. The radio crackled again. He's still behind you. The message wasn't a memory. It wasn't a loop. It was a warning. I looked up at the rearview mirror. Through the rear window, piercing the yellow fog, I saw a single headlight. A motorcycle. It was far back, but it was closing fast. The engine note of the bike wasn't the high whine of a sport bike. It was the low, aggressive thrum of a chopper. The ink man. He hadn't given up. He had come out of the house. Panic, fresh and hot, flooded my system. The terror of the ghost in the passenger seat was suddenly eclipsed by the very real, very physical threat of the man with the knife closing in on my bumper. "Okay," I said to the empty seat. "Okay, Derek, message received." I slammed the car back into drive and floored it. The car didn't feel heavy anymore. It surged forward, the engine roaring with renewed power, as if the invisible passenger was pushing us, willing the machine to go faster. The fog outside swirled violently, forming shapes in the light hands' faces, mouths screaming in silence. But inside the car, the atmosphere had shifted. The heat wasn't stifling anymore, it was protective. The smell of cigarette smoke felt like a shield. I wasn't driving a delivery vehicle anymore. I was piloting a haunted house on wheels. And for the first time in my life, I realized that being haunted might be the only thing that kept me alive. But as I sped toward the distant glow of the city lights, watching the single headlight bobbing and weaving in my mirror, I knew the night wasn't over. The ink man wasn't just chasing a victim, he was chasing a thief, because in his twisted, ritualistic mind, I had stolen his vessel, and he wanted it back. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 3:00 a.m., the witching hour. The radio buzzed one last time. "Take the bridge." I didn't question it. I didn't check the GPS. I yanked the wheel to the left, tires screaming, heading toward the rusted framework of the old iron bridge. The chase was on, and I had a navigator who had been dead for 3 years. The rearview mirror framed the nightmare perfectly. The single headlight of the motorcycle wasn't bouncing or vibrating like a normal machine traversing the cratered roads of the ironworks district. It floated. It cut through the yellow fog with a steady, predatory laser focus growing larger with every beat of my heart. The voice on the radio, the voice that shouldn't exist, the voice of a dead man named Derek, had said, "Take the bridge." Logic screamed against it. The old iron bridge was a rusted skeleton of the 1920s, condemned for a reason. It was narrow, the asphalt was chewed down to the rebar, and it led to a bottleneck that would trap me against the canal. It was a tactical dead end. If I drove onto that bridge, there was no turning back, no side streets, no room to maneuver. I would be funneling myself into a metal cage suspended 50 feet above freezing black water. But logic was back on the porch, cowering behind a locked door. In the driver's seat, instinct had taken the wheel. "The bridge," I whispered, gripping the leather wheel until my knuckles turned the color of bone. "We're taking the bridge." I didn't steer the car so much as I aimed it. The Honda Civic, usually a tame commuter appliance, felt like it had undergone a feral transformation. The throttle response was instantaneous, jerky, aggressive. The suspension, which usually wallowed in corners, felt stiff and planted, as if an invisible weight was pressing the chassis into the pavement, gluing the tires to the road. I drifted around a corner past a crumbling smelting plant, the rear tires kicking up a spray of gravel that rattled against the wheel wells like buckshot. I glanced at the speedometer. 80 miles per hour, in a 30 zone, in zero visibility. The seatbelt on the passenger side was pulled tight, the fabric strap straining against nothingness. The depression in the seat cushion was deeper now, shifting as the car cornered, mimicking the lean of a human body bracing against G-forces. The smell of old spice and wet wool was so thick, it coated the back of my throat. It wasn't just a smell anymore. It was a presence. It occupied the physical space of the cabin, displacing the air. Ding! The dashboard chimed. Not a warning this time, a notification. The passenger airbag off light flickered and then switched to passenger airbag on. The car believed. The sensors believed. The machine knew what my eyes refused to see. I was the chauffeur for a ghost. I looked in the mirror again. The headlight was closer. The ink man was gaining. He wasn't riding a sport bike. It looked like a modified chopper stripped of all fairings, matte black and skeletal. And he wasn't wearing a helmet. His face was exposed to the biting wind and the freezing fog, his skin pale and glowing like a fungal growth in the dark. He sat upright, rigid, his coat flapping behind him like the wings of a giant bat. He didn't look like he was riding the bike. He looked like he was fused to it, a centaur of flesh and steel, fueled by obsession. He raised one hand from the handlebars. He held something, not a gun, not a knife. He threw it. A cloud of dust exploded against my rear windshield. Thwack! It sounded like hail. I flinched, expecting the glass to shatter, but it held. I peered through the rear view. It was salt ash. Hexes? I muttered, the absurdity of the thought almost making me laugh hysterically. He's throwing hexes at a Honda. The radio static surged, drowning out the roar of the engine. Left. Hard. Left. The voice was clearer this time. It didn't sound like it was coming from the speakers. It sounded like it was coming from inside my own skull, bypassing the ear canal entirely. I saw the turn too late. It was a sharp left onto the access ramp for the bridge hidden behind a pile of rusted shipping containers. I was going too fast. Understeer was inevitable. The laws of physics dictated that the car would plow forward, slide off the road, and slam into the concrete barrier. "I can't make it," I screamed. I stomped on the brake, but I didn't lock it up. I pumped it, trying to transfer weight to the front tires. It wasn't enough. The wall of corrugated steel was rushing toward my headlights. Suddenly the steering wheel jerked in my hands. It wasn't power steering failure. It was a physical force. Invisible hands grabbed the rim of the wheel at the 10 and 2 o'clock positions and wrenched it to the left with superhuman speed. The car didn't slide. It pivoted. The rear end stepped out in a perfect controlled drift. The tires screamed, a high-pitched wail of torturous friction filling the cabin with the acrid stench of burning rubber. The back bumper missed the shipping container by inches. I heard the wind buffer against the metal, and the nose of the car snapped into alignment with the ramp. My hands were barely touching the wheel. I stared at them, trembling, hovering over the leather as the wheel self-corrected, spinning back to center with a smooth, calculated precision. "Thanks, Derek." I breathed, my voice trembling. The seatbelt tightened in response, a silent acknowledgement. We shot up the ramp and onto the old iron bridge. The surface changed instantly. The hum of asphalt was replaced by the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of tires rolling over metal expansion joints and grated decking. The fog here was worse, rising from the canal below like steam from a cauldron, swirling through the rusted trusses of the bridge's superstructure. The bridge was a tunnel of steel girders, claustrophobic and ancient. There were no lights. The only illumination came from my headlights, bouncing off the rivets and crossbeams, creating a strobe light effect that was disorienting and hypnotic. I checked the mirror. The ink man was on the ramp. He hit the turn with impossible grace, leaning the bike so low the foot pegs sparked against the concrete, a trail of orange fire chasing him up the incline. He wasn't slowing down. He was accelerating. He's going to ram us, I realized. The bridge was narrow, 2 lanes, but barely wide enough for 2 modern cars to pass. There was no shoulder, just a rusted railing and then the drop. "Stop!" The radio voice was urgent, sharp. "Stop the car!" "What?" I yelled. "Are you crazy? He's right there." "Stop. Trust me." It went against every survival instinct I had. Stopping meant trapping myself. Stopping meant letting the predator catch up. But the wheel jerked again, gently, this time resisting my forward pressure. The car began to decelerate on its own, the engine braking heavily. I looked at the empty seat. I looked at the depression in the cushion, the phantom passenger who had just saved my life on the turn. I slammed on the brakes. The Honda skidded to a halt in the middle of the bridge, exactly halfway across. The engine dropped to an idle, the silence of the stop rushing in to replace the wind noise. I looked in the mirror. The ink man didn't brake. He roared onto the bridge, the single headlight blinding in the rear window. He was coming at 80 miles an hour. He was going to rear-end me. He was going to crush the trunk, snap my neck, and send us both over the railing. I braced myself, jamming my head back against the headrest, squeezing my eyes shut. Scream! The sound of the motorcycle braking was like a banshee scream. It wasn't a controlled stop. It was a slide. I opened my eyes and looked in the mirror. The ink man had laid the bike down. He slid sideways across the metal grating, sparks showering around him like fireworks. The bike spun metal, grinding on metal, and came to a halt 20 feet behind my bumper. Silence fell over the bridge. The fog swirled through the trusses. The canal water churned silently below. I watched the mirror. The ink man stood up. He didn't check for injuries. He didn't look at his damaged bike. He rose from the pavement with a stiff, unnatural motion like a marionette being pulled upright by invisible strings. His coat was shredded, one sleeve hanging by a thread, revealing the tapestry of black sigils covering his arm. He reached into his coat. He pulled out the hunting knife, but he didn't run at the car. He began to walk, A slow, rhythmic, ceremonial walk. He was chanting. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I saw his mouth moving. His jaw worked in a chewing motion, grinding the syllables. He raised the knife toward the sky, then pointed it at my car. No, not at the car, at the passenger side. "Lock it," the radio whispered. "It's locked," I said, my hand hovering over the central locking switch. "I locked it when I got in." "He has a key." My blood froze. A key? How could he have a key? Then I saw it. In his other hand, the one not holding the knife, the ink man held a small silver object. It glinted in the red glow of my tail lights. It was a skeleton key, not a car key. An actual old-fashioned iron skeleton key. He wasn't trying to unlock the door mechanically. He was trying to unlock it metaphysically. "The opener," I whispered, remembering his words on the porch. "I am the opener." He stopped 10 feet from the rear bumper. He raised the skeleton key and made a twisting motion in the air. Click. The sound came from inside my car. The driver's side lock popped up. I stared at it in horror. I slapped it down. Click, the passenger side lock popped up. "No," I gasped. I hit the master lock switch. Thunk, thunk, locked. Click, they both popped up again. The ink man smiled. Even from this distance and the red glow of the taillights, I saw that rictus grin. He knew. He was bypassing the electronics. He was hacking reality. He started walking again, faster this time. He moved alongside the car, passing the rear window, passing the C-pillar. He wasn't looking at me. His obsession was focused entirely on the empty seat beside me. He reached the passenger window. He stopped. He pressed his face against the glass. Up close, he was a map of nightmares. The tattoos on his face weren't just ink, they were scarification. Raised keloid scars formed complex geometric patterns on his cheeks and forehead. His eyes were rolled back so far only the whites were visible, trembling with religious ecstasy. He tapped on the glass with the tip of the knife. Tap, tap, tap. "Open," he mouthed. "The vessel must be purged." I looked at the passenger seat. The seatbelt was straining against the invisible form so hard I thought the webbing would snap. The depression in the seat was thrashing, shifting wildly, as if the occupant was struggling to get free or struggling to hold back. The radio static screamed a high-pitched feedback loop that made my teeth ache. The ink man raised the skeleton key and pressed it against the glass of the passenger window. The glass didn't break. It began to fog. Frost patterns bloomed outward from the point where the key touched the window. Feathery white ice crystals spread rapidly, turning the safety glass opaque. "He's freezing it," I realized. "He's freezing the glass to shatter it." I looked at the ink man. He was chanting louder now. I could hear him through the glass. A low, droning hum that vibrated in the chassis of the car. "Eggsy, Eggsy, Eggsy, get out, get out, get out." He wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to exorcise the car. He wanted Derek out so he could put something else in. "Do something," I yelled at the empty seat. "Derek, do something!" The radio died. The static cut out instantly. The car engine died. The heater died. The dashboard went black. Absolute darkness. We were stranded on the bridge, suspended in the void with a sorcerer outside the window. The only light came from the ink man. The tattoos on his arm, the one pressing the key against the glass, began to glow. A faint bioluminescent purple pulsing from under his skin. He raised the knife high above his head, grasping it with both hands like an executioner. He was going to bring the pommel down on the frozen glass. He was going to break the seal. I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't find my breath. I was a spectator at my own funeral. Then the dashboard lit up. It wasn't the normal amber glow. It was red. Every single warning light on the cluster illuminated simultaneously. Check engine, oil pressure, tire pressure, ABS, airbag, battery. A Christmas tree of catastrophic failure. The radio screen flared to life. It didn't show a station frequency. It showed a single word scrolling across the digital display in block letters HIM. The volume knob turned. By itself. I watched it rotate a slow, deliberate clockwise motion. 20%. 50%. Max volume. A sound erupted from the speakers that wasn't human. It wasn't speech. It wasn't static. It was a roar. A digital, distorted, bass-heavy roar that sounded like a beast trapped inside the copper wiring of the sound system. It was so loud the rearview mirror vibrated out of alignment. It was so loud I felt my fillings rattle. The Inkman froze the knife hovering inches from the glass. The passenger seat belt unbuckled. Click! The strap retracted with a violent snap. The frost on the window didn't melt. It exploded outward, not inward into the cabin, outward. The tempered glass shattered into thousands of diamonds, blasting into the Inkman's face like a shotgun blast of ice. He screamed a genuine human sound of pain and staggered back, dropping the knife. He clawed at his face, blood welling up from 100 tiny cuts mixing with the white frost on his skin. But he didn't retreat. He was a fanatic. Pain was just fuel. He lunged forward, reaching through the broken window with his bare hands. He grabbed the empty headrest. He grabbed the air above the seat. "I claim this vessel!" he shrieked, spitting blood. "I bind you! I bind you!" He was grappling with the air. His muscles bulged, veins popping in his neck as he wrestled with an invisible opponent. He was being pushed back. His fingers clawed at the fabric of the seat, ripping the upholstery. I shrank against the driver's door, terrified. The space between the driver's seat and the passenger seat had become a war zone between two realities. The air in the cabin rippled like heat haze. "Start," I begged the car. "Please start." I twisted the key in the ignition. Click, click, click. Dead battery. The Inkman had half his body inside the car now. He was winning. He was forcing his way in, his glowing tattoos pulsing brighter, burning the air with the smell of ozone and charred meat. He turned his head and looked at me. "You!" he snarled. "You are in the way!" He reached for me with a bloody hand. Suddenly the glove box popped open. It didn't just open, it flew open with hydraulic force. The manual, the registration, the napkins, everything spill out. And then the light inside the glove box, that tiny, weak, incandescent bulb, flared with the intensity of a dying star. It blinded the Inkman. He recoiled, shielding his eyes, and then the hand appeared. It wasn't a ghostly hand, it wasn't transparent. It was a hand made of shadow condensing out of the darkness of the footwell. It was large, calloused, and solid. The shadow hand shot up and grabbed the Inkman by the throat. The sound was wet and crunchy. The Inkman's eyes bulged. His chant was cut off in a gurgle. The hand didn't squeeze. It pushed. It shoved the Inkman backward with the force of a hydraulic ram. He flew out of the window, his boots leaving the pavement. He was airborne. He hit the opposite railing of the bridge with a sickening metallic clang. The railing on the old iron bridge was rusted weak. It wasn't designed to take the impact of a full-grown man thrown by a supernatural force. The metal groaned, the rivets popped. Snap! The railing gave way. The Inkman flailed, grabbing at the wet air. For a second he hung there, suspended over the abyss, his eyes locked on the empty passenger seat. The look on his face wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. "Derek," he whispered, and then he fell. There was no scream. Just the rush of wind, and seconds later a heavy distant splash in the black water of the canal below. Silence returned to the bridge. I sat frozen, staring at the broken railing, the jagged metal teeth framing the darkness where the Inkman had vanished. The car was quiet. The red warning lights on the dashboard faded one by one. The radio display went blank. The shadow hand in the footwell dissolved into smoke and was sucked out the broken window. The temperature in the car began to drop rapidly. The stifling heat was gone. The smell of Old Spice and cigarette smoke lingered, but it was fading like a memory losing its edges. I was alone, or almost alone. I looked at the passenger seat. The upholstery was torn where the Inkman had clawed it. The glass shards littered the floor mat. The seat was empty, no depression, no weight. "Derek," I whispered. Silence. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, instantly settling into a smooth, steady idle. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the empty bridge ahead. I put the car in drive. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I drove slowly, carefully avoiding the glass on the floor, avoiding the gap in the railing. I crossed the rest of the bridge. I didn't look back. You don't look back at the abyss when it winks at you. You keep your eyes on the road. But as I reached the other side, entering the relative safety of the streetlight grid, the radio crackled one last time. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a roar, it was a song. Faintly through the static, a classic rock song began to play, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. It played for 10 seconds, clear as a bell, and then faded back into the white noise of the dead airwaves. I drove until I found a 24-hour gas station with bright LED lights and people. I parked under the canopy, locked the doors, and just sat there, shaking, crying, laughing. I checked the dash cam. I needed to know. I needed to see. I pulled the SD card out of the camera with trembling fingers and shoved it into the adapter for my laptop, which was in my backpack on the back seat. I booted it up. I found the file marked with the timestamp of the bridge crossing. I pressed play. The video showed the bridge, the fog, the strobe of the headlights. It showed the ink man on the motorcycle, the crash. It showed him walking toward the car. But when he reached the window, when he started chanting, the camera glitching. The video tore and pixelated, the audio distorted into a high-pitched shriek, but for one single frame, 1 millisecond of footage, right before the window exploded, the camera caught a reflection in the rearview mirror. It wasn't me. Sitting in the passenger seat, clear as day, was a young man. He was wearing a flannel shirt. He had messy hair, and he was smoking a cigarette. He was looking directly at the camera, and he had a hole in the side of his head, a gunshot wound, but he was smiling. He winked. Then the window exploded, and the ink man was gone. I closed the laptop. I ejected the card. I snapped the SD card in half. Then I snapped the halves into quarters. I walked over to the trash can by the gas pumps and buried the pieces under a pile of coffee cups and candy wrappers. Some evidence isn't meant for the police. Some evidence is a bill of sale. I got back into the car. The broken window let in the freezing wind. I shivered, zipping up my jacket. I looked at the empty seat. "Thanks for the ride," I whispered. The seatbelt sensor didn't chime. The air was cold. The car was just a car again. The vessel was empty. Or maybe it was just waiting for the next shift. I put the car in gear and drove toward the sunrise, leaving the dead zone, the ink man, and the legend of the ghost passenger behind me. But I knew deep down in the wiring of my nervous system that I would never truly drive alone again, because once you open the door, you can never really close it. The fluorescent lights of the 12th Precinct interrogation room hummed with a sound that was dangerously similar to the static of my car radio. It was a sterile, headache-inducing white noise that drilled into my temples, doing nothing to mask the smell of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I sat at the metal table, my hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm water. I'd been there for 4 hours. My jacket was still damp from the freezing fog on the bridge, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ink man falling backward into the abyss. His eyes locked on my empty passenger seat with a look of terrifying recognition. Detective Miller sat across from me. He looked like he had been awake for a week. He was flipping through a thick file, the paper swishing loudly in the small room. "Let's go over it one more time, Caleb," Miller said, not looking up. "You were delivering an order to the ironworks district. You were approached by a man with a knife. You fled. He pursued you on a motorcycle. He crashed on the old iron bridge and fell over the railing while trying to attack your vehicle." "Yes," I said. My voice was raspy, scraped raw from the screaming. Miller stopped flipping the pages. He looked at me, his eyes hard and calculating. "We found the bike Caleb, or what's left of it. It was stolen 2 days ago from a chop shop in Gary, and we found the body." I tightened my grip on the cup. "He's dead." "The fall killed him instantly. Hit a concrete piling before he hit the water," Miller said. He slid a photo across the table. It was a mugshot. The man didn't have the scarification on his face in the photo, but the eyes were the same dead black pits. Silas Vance, also known as the Scribe. We've been looking for him for 6 months, suspected in 5 disappearances along the I-90 corridor. He liked to target lone drivers, delivery guys, truckers, people no one misses right away. I looked at the photo. Silas Vance, the Ink Man. He looked human here, stripped of the supernatural aura he had possessed on the bridge. Just a predator, just meat. "He was trying to get in my car," I whispered. "He kept saying it wasn't empty." Miller leaned back in his chair, the metal legs scraping against the linoleum. "Yeah, well, toxicology came back. Vance was high on a cocktail of PCP and homemade meth. Guys on that stuff. They see demons, Caleb. They see God. They see whatever their broken brains project onto the world. He probably thought you were the devil himself." I nodded slowly. That was the official narrative. Drugs, madness, hallucinations. It was clean. It was logical. It explained the strength, the chanting, the fear. It explained everything except the frost on the window and the seatbelt that buckled itself. "There's one other thing," Miller said, closing the file. "The name you shouted. On the 911 call before the line cut out, you yelled Derek." My heart skipped a beat. It was just a name, a bluff. I was trying to make him think I had backup. Miller stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. He was weighing my answer, looking for the lie. Finally, he sighed and stood up. "It was a hell of a coincidence then," he said. "You know the history of your vehicle, right? The '16 Civic?" "I bought it used," I said. "Cheap. From an old guy in the suburbs? Mister." "Sallow?" Miller nodded. "Sad story. We handled that case, too, 3 years ago. His son was carjacked in that vehicle. Shot in the passenger seat, point-blank range." The room seemed to tilt. The buzzing of the lights got louder. "His son's name was Derek." Miller said softly. "Case went cold. Never found the shooter." Miller walked to the door and opened it. "You're free to go, Caleb. It's clear-cut self-defense. We'll keep the car for a few days for forensics, verify the window damage, but you're in the clear. Go home, get some sleep." I walked out of the precinct into the gray light of dawn. The city was waking up. Garbage trucks were grinding their gears, commuters were rushing to trains. The world was normal again. But I wasn't. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering in the cold morning air. The detective's words echoed in my mind, locking the final piece of the puzzle into place with a terrifying click. Case went cold. Never found the shooter. Silas Vance, the Ink Man. He hadn't just been scared of a ghost. He had been scared of his ghost. Silas was the one who had killed Derek Sallow 3 years ago. That was why he targeted the car. Maybe he recognized it. Or maybe in his drug-fueled, heightened state he saw the spirit he had trapped there. When I screamed the name, I wasn't just bluffing. I was conducting a confrontation. I had unwittingly reunited a murderer with his victim. I didn't go home. I took a bus to the impound lot 3 days later when they released the car. The Honda sat in the corner of the lot, looking battered. The passenger window was covered in plastic wrap and duct tape. The rear bumper was dented from where the bike had almost hit it. I signed the paperwork. The clerk handed me the keys. They felt heavy, like they were made of lead. I walked to the car. I unlocked the door. The interior smelled faint now. The old spice was gone. The cigarette smoke was gone. It just smelled like cold plastic and the lingering chemical scent of fingerprint powder. I sat in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I looked at the passenger seat. It was just a seat. Gray fabric slightly stained. No depression. No presence. "You got him," I whispered to the empty air. "It's over, Derek. You can rest now." Silence. No chime. No static. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, followed immediately by a sharp pang of guilt. I had used him. I had used a trapped soul as a weapon to save my own skin. I drove the car straight to a dealership on Western Avenue. I didn't care about the trade-in value. I didn't care that I was upside down on the loan. I traded it in for a bicycle and a bus pass. The salesman looked at me like I was crazy when I handed him the keys and walked away without even looking back. Good riddance, I muttered, walking toward the bus stop. I spent the next 6 months trying to scrub the night from my memory. I got a new job, remote IT support, boring safe, sitting at a desk in my apartment with all the lights on. I stopped ordering delivery. I stopped going out at night. I lived a small, quiet life. I thought I was free. I thought that by selling the car, I had severed the connection. I thought that ghosts were haunting places or objects, not people. But I was wrong. It happened last Tuesday. It was raining a torrential downpour that turned the Chicago streets into rivers. I had stayed late at a friend's house for a birthday party, my first social outing in half a year. I missed the last bus. I stood under the awning of a bodega watching the rain hammer the pavement. I didn't want to do it. The icon on my phone screen seemed to glow with a malicious light. Uber. I had no choice. It was a 20-minute drive home. I downloaded the app again. I requested a ride. The car arrived 5 minutes later. A black Toyota Camry, clean, new. I opened the back door. "Hey, how's it going?" the driver asked. He was a young guy, maybe 22, wearing a baseball cap. He looked normal. He looked alive. "Good," I said, sliding into the back seat. "Just heading home." The driver pulled away from the curb. The rain lashed against the windows, creating a cocoon of noise that isolated us from the world. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth. Thwack, hiss, thwack, hiss. I leaned my head against the cool glass, closing my eyes. I was tired. I just wanted to be in my bed. Then I heard it. Click. My eyes snapped open. The sound had come from the front, from the passenger seat. The driver didn't react. He kept his eyes on the road, humming along to the radio. I looked at the front passenger seat. It was pushed all the way forward to give me leg room. It was empty, but the seatbelt was buckled. I stared at it. Maybe the driver kept it buckled to stop the sensor from beeping. That was a common trick. Yeah, that had to be it. I sat up straighter, my heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Hey," I said to the driver, do you always keep that buckled?" The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine. "Keep what buckled?" "The front seat belt," I said, pointing. The driver looked over at the passenger seat. He frowned. "Weird," he said. "I didn't buckle that. Must have done it when I cleaned the car earlier." He reached over to unbuckle it. He pressed the red release button. The buckle didn't release. He pressed it again, harder. Stuck. Piece of junk. The air in the car suddenly grew cold. Not the damp chill of the rain, but a dry, biting cold that I remembered. The smell of the driver's vanilla air freshener vanished, replaced instantly by the scent of wet wool and stale tobacco. The radio static hissed. The driver tapped the console. "Sorry, radio's been acting up all night. Keep switching to AM." My hands turned to ice. It wasn't the car. It wasn't the Honda. It was me. I was the vessel. I had opened the door on the bridge. I had invited the passenger in. And when I sold the car, Derek hadn't stayed with the metal and plastic. He had stayed with the driver. He had stayed with the only person who had ever acknowledged him, the only person who had given him a name and a purpose. I looked at the back of the front passenger seat. The headrest shifted slightly as if someone had just settled in for a long ride. The radio static cleared. A voice, low, gravelly, and amused, whispered through the speakers. "Nice ride, Caleb." The driver frowned, fiddling with the volume knob. "Did you hear that must be crossing frequencies with a trucker or something?" I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. I looked at the rearview mirror again. The driver was looking at the road, oblivious. But in the reflection of the mirror, in the dark corner where the passenger seat should be, I saw the flare of a lighter. A brief orange spark, and then the reflection of a young man with a hole in the side of his head exhaling a plume of gray smoke. He caught my eye in the mirror and winked. I sank back into the seat. I didn't scream. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run. You can sell a car. You can move to a new apartment. You can change your job. But you can't sell a connection. You can't close a door that you burned off the hinges. "Yeah," I whispered, closing my eyes as the smell of cigarette smoke filled the clean new Camry. It's a nice ride. I realized then that I would never be alone again. Every car I stepped into, every journey I took, he would be there, riding shotgun, watching the road, waiting for the next threat. Some people pay for a bodyguard. I got mine for the price of a McDonald's delivery and a terrifying bluff. The driver turned onto the highway. The city lights blurred past us. "You okay back there, man?" the driver asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at the empty seat where the seatbelt was pulled tight against an invisible chest. "I'm fine," I said. "Just watch the road." Because the road is full of monsters, and sometimes the only way to survive them is to bring one of your own.